What's the residential nil rate band? This is an allowance which we can use to reduce the value of our taxable estate for inheritance tax purposes. Inheritance tax is a tax charged when we die. If our estate is worth over certain amounts, the excess over those certain amounts is charged to tax at a rate of 40%. So certainly not something to be overlooked. We have a nil rate band per person of £325,000. This has been around for a very long time. It means that if our estate is worth £325,000 or less, there would be no inheritance tax to pay. And if it's worth more than that, the first £325,000, assuming the full allowance is available, would be offset against the total value of the estate, which will reduce the amount that's liable to inheritance tax. The residential nil rate band is comparatively new. It's only been around for a few years. It's currently £175,000, though set to increase each year in line with the Consumer Prices Index. It applies if we own or have owned our own home, the home we live in, our residential property. And if we're going to leave that to direct descendants, we can use the residential nil rate band against it to reduce the amount of tax that we are likely to have a liability for on our estate. So, for example, if someone has a house which is worth £200,000 that they own, when they die, they would be able to offset the residential nil rate band of £175,000 against their residence. This means that there would only be a further £25,000 which would fall into the pot for calculating inheritance tax. So it's a second nil rate band that we can use to reduce the value of our estate. But remember, this one can only be used against the value of our residential property, the house that we live in, and our ownership share of that. If we've sold our house, our residence, before we die, and we've kept hold of that money, and that money is going to go to direct descendants, then that too may qualify for the residential nil rate band. A few things to be aware of. Firstly, if our house is worth less than £175,000, or whatever the residential nil rate band is in future years, then the limit of how much we can claim is capped at what the value of our house is. So if our house is worth £120,000, that would be the most that we would be able to claim against the residential nil rate band. Also, it must be left to direct descendants, so children and grandchildren most commonly. It does include, though, for example, stepchildren, adopted children and foster children as well. If our estate is worth over £2 million, we start to lose our entitlement to the residential nil rate band. It's tapered away at a rate of £1 for every £2 our estate is over £2 million. What that means is, once our estate gets to currently a level of £2.35 million, we would have lost the residential nil rate band in full. So there are a few quirks and a few things to be aware of with the residential nil rate band. It doesn't work in the exact same way as the standard nil rate band, but it is something which can be applied to the value of your estate in certain circumstances, and if used correctly, to reduce the amount of inheritance tax that may be paid in the event of your death.